The people who seem invisible often hear the truths no one else notices. The crystal chandeliers hanging above the Grand Crescent Ballroom scattered warm light across polished marble floors as Manhattan's elite moved from table to table, exchanging handshakes worth millions of dollars and smiles worth even more. Waiters glided silently through the crowd carrying silver trays, while a string quartet played softly beneath the hum of private conversations. To most of the guests, Emily Carter was invisible, just another waitress in a black uniform. Just another young woman refilling water glasses and clearing empty plates. That was fine with her. Invisible people were often underestimated, and underestimated people learned things. Emily balanced a tray against one hand and moved carefully through the ballroom. She knew many of the faces around her, not because she followed financial news, but because she had spent 3 years serving events exactly like this one. She knew which billionaires treated staff with respect and which ones never made eye contact. She knew who tipped generously and who lectured servers about hard work while wearing watches worth more than a family home. Most importantly, she knew that wealthy people often spoke freely around those they considered unimportant. Tonight felt different. The air carried a strange tension beneath the expensive laughter. Small groups formed and dissolved near the ballroom's edges. Conversations stopped when certain people approached. Eyes followed one man more than anyone else. Alexander Hayes. At 39, he had built one of the largest investment firms in America. Magazines called him brilliant. Competitors called him dangerous. Investors called him reliable. Yet as Emily watched him from across the room, he didn't look powerful. He looked tired. His charcoal suit was perfect. His posture remained confident. But there was something in his expression that reminded her of a man carrying a burden he could not share. Several guests approached him throughout the evening. Each interaction appeared friendly. Each smile seemed rehearsed. Emily noticed details others ignored. The brief pause before a handshake. The forced laughter. The glance over a shoulder. She had learned long ago that people revealed themselves in moments they thought no one was watching. As she approached a table near the center of the ballroom, she overheard fragments of conversation. A merger. A board vote. A family trust. A dispute over inheritance. Names repeated themselves. So did concern. Alexander Hayes was clearly at the center of something much larger than tonight's gala. Emily placed fresh glasses beside a group of investors and stepped away. A few minutes later, she felt someone watching her. Not staring, observing. When she looked up, she found Alexander standing alone near one of the ballroom's tall windows. For a brief second their eyes met. Most wealthy guests looked through staff members as if they were part of the furniture. Alexander did not. He seemed to be studying her with quiet curiosity. Emily looked away and continued working. 10 minutes later, she was passing behind a row of guests when a voice interrupted her thoughts. Mississippi, she turned. Alexander Hayes stood only a few feet away. Up close, he seemed even more exhausted than before. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who hadn't trusted the people around him in a very long time. Yes, sir? Emily asked professionally. Alexander glanced around the room. Hundreds of guests continued talking beneath the glow of crystal light. No one paid attention to them. Then he stepped slightly closer and lowered his voice. I need a favor. Emily remained calm. What kind of favor? For a moment, Alexander hesitated. The hesitation surprised her. Powerful men rarely hesitated. Then he leaned closer and whispered words she never expected to hear. Pretend to be my wife. The music continued. Glasses clinked. Conversations carried on. Yet somehow the entire room felt silent. Emily stared at him. Not shocked. Not flustered. Simply studying him. Alexander's expression remained serious. There was no humor in his eyes. No arrogance. No flirtation. Only urgency. Then Emily slowly set her tray onto a nearby table and gave an answer so unexpected that several guests standing close enough to overhear immediately turned pale. If your family can be bought that easily, she said quietly, then money isn't your real problem. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The nearby investors exchanged uneasy glances. One woman holding a champagne glass looked down as if she suddenly regretted overhearing the conversation. Alexander did not react with anger. That surprised Emily more than the request itself. Most powerful men were accustomed to immediate agreement. They expected doors to open when they arrived and silence when they spoke. Instead, Alexander simply studied her face. The faint sounds of the quartet drifted through the ballroom. Somewhere across the room, laughter erupted around a table of executives. Yet the space surrounding them felt strangely separate from the rest of the gala. "You think this is about money," Alexander said quietly. Emily crossed her arms. "You offered a stranger a role in your personal life during a room full of billionaires. What else am I supposed to think?" A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not a proud smile, not an amused one. More like the expression of someone hearing an uncomfortable truth. Before he could answer, another guest approached. An older man in an expensive navy tuxedo placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "There you are," the man said. "The board members are looking for you." His eyes shifted toward Emily. The warmth disappeared immediately. "And who is this?" Emily recognized the tone. She had heard it hundreds of times. The subtle assumption that a waitress could not possibly belong in an important conversation. Alexander noticed it too. "Someone more honest than most people in this room," he replied. The older man's smile tightened. Emily almost laughed. The man excused himself moments later, but not before casting another skeptical glance in her direction. As he disappeared into the crowd, Alexander sighed. The sound carried the weight of exhaustion. Emily picked up her tray. "You should probably get back to your guests." "Probably," Alexander admitted. Neither of them moved. Finally, he spoke again. "You know something interesting about wealthy people?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "I serve them every week." "Try me." His gaze drifted toward the ballroom. "Most of them are terrified." Emily followed his eyes. The room looked flawless. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, tailored suits. Everything appeared perfect. "Terrified of what?" she asked. "Losing what they already have." For the first time that evening, she heard complete honesty in his voice. No performance, no image, just truth. Alexander glanced toward a group gathered near the stage. Several people were watching him when they thought he was not looking. The moment their eyes met his, they smiled. Emily noticed it instantly. "So did he." "That is the problem," he said quietly. "Nobody says what they mean anymore." Emily looked around the ballroom again. Suddenly she understood why he seemed different from the other guests. He was surrounded by people, yet completely alone. "And you think pretending to have a wife fixes that?" she asked. Alexander shook his head. "No." His answer came immediately. "I think it helps me find out who is lying." Emily stared at him. The sentence felt heavier than everything he had said before. "What does that mean?" For a moment, Alexander seemed to consider whether he should answer. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded note. The paper looked ordinary, yet the expression on his face suggested otherwise. "3 weeks ago," he said, "someone left this in my office." Emily accepted the note cautiously. The handwriting was simple, just one sentence. "Trust no one at the gala, not even family." She looked up. Alexander's eyes never left hers. "Anonymous?" she asked. He nodded. The next day, 2 executives resigned unexpectedly. Emily frowned. "Coincidence?" "That is what I thought." His voice dropped lower. "Then someone tried to manipulate a vote involving my father's estate." The ballroom suddenly felt colder. Emily folded the note carefully. "And you think the person responsible is here tonight?" Alexander glanced across the sea of smiling faces. "I know they are." The quartet began another song. Applause echoed near the stage. A master of ceremonies stepped toward a microphone and welcomed everyone to the evening's main presentation. Around them, guests started moving toward their seats. Alexander looked at Emily one final time. "That is why I asked for your help." Emily opened her mouth to answer, but stopped. Across the room, she noticed something unusual. A man standing near the stage had been watching Alexander the entire conversation. The moment their eyes met, he turned away. Emily did not know his name. She did not know his story. But for the first time all night, she felt the faint sensation that something important had just begun. Emily kept her eyes on the man near the stage for another moment. But the crowd shifted between them, and he disappeared into a cluster of guests moving toward their tables. The opportunity to point him out vanished almost instantly. Around her, servers began preparing for the next phase of the evening. Crystal glasses were adjusted. Place cards were checked. The ballroom transformed from a networking event into a formal dinner within minutes. Emily picked up her tray again. "I should get back to work," she said. Alexander nodded, though he seemed reluctant to end the conversation. "Will you think about what I asked?" Emily studied him carefully. Earlier, she would have dismissed the request completely. Now she was not so sure. Something about the anonymous note bothered her. Something about the way certain guests watched him when they believed he was not paying attention. Most of all, something about Alexander himself felt genuine. Not perfect, not innocent, just genuine. "I will think about it," she said. For the first time that evening, relief appeared in his expression. Not victory, relief. Then he stepped away and disappeared into the crowd. Emily resumed her work, but her attention had changed. She was no longer simply carrying trays and refilling glasses. She was observing, listening, watching. Invisible people had advantages. 10 minutes later, she approached a table occupied by several executives discussing market forecasts. Their conversation sounded ordinary until one of them casually mentioned the Hayes family trust. The others immediately lowered their voices. Emily continued pouring water as if she had not heard anything. "The vote is tomorrow morning," one man whispered. "Then everything changes." Another guest glanced around nervously. "Keep your voice down." Emily moved on without reacting, but the words remained in her mind. Everything changes. Across the ballroom, Alexander was seated beside several board members. His posture remained calm, yet he seemed isolated even while surrounded by people. No one sat too close. No one appeared completely comfortable. It was the kind of distance that existed when trust had already begun to disappear. As dessert service started, Emily entered a private corridor leading toward the ballroom kitchen. The noise of the gala faded behind her. For a moment, the hallway was quiet except for the sound of distant footsteps. Then she heard voices. Two men were standing near a service entrance. They were dressed like guests, not employees. Emily slowed her pace. One of the voices sounded familiar. It belonged to the man she had noticed watching Alexander earlier. She could not see them clearly from her position, but she could hear enough. "Tomorrow is the only chance," the man said. "If he finds out before the vote, the entire plan falls apart." The second man sounded nervous. "And what about the records?" "Already handled." Emily felt a chill run through her. She remained hidden behind a partially open door, pretending to organize linen carts. The conversation continued. "He still trusts the wrong people," the first man said quietly. "That makes this easier." Footsteps echoed down the hallway. The two men immediately stopped talking. Seconds later, they walked past the doorway and disappeared toward the ballroom. Emily finally exhaled. She had not even realized she was holding her breath. Trusts, votes, plans, anonymous warnings. The pieces were beginning to connect. She returned to the ballroom carrying a fresh tray of coffee cups. As she entered, her eyes immediately found Alexander. He was speaking with a group of investors near the stage. Then something unexpected happened. Across the room, an elderly woman approached him. Her silver hair reflected the chandelier light. She touched his arm gently and said something that made his expression soften instantly. It was the first genuine smile Emily had seen from him all evening. Yet while everyone else focused on the conversation, Emily noticed something different. Several guests were watching the elderly woman. Not with affection, not with respect, with concern, almost fear. The realization struck her immediately. Whatever was happening inside the Hayes family was bigger than a business disagreement. And somehow, without intending to, she had already stepped into the middle of it. The gala continued with all the elegance money could buy, yet Emily could no longer see it the same way. Every polished smile seemed rehearsed. Every compliment sounded calculated. Every conversation felt like part of a larger game hidden beneath the crystal lights. She moved between tables carrying coffee and dessert plates, but her attention remained fixed on the people surrounding Alexander Hayes. The elderly woman she had noticed earlier remained by his side for several minutes before being escorted to a reserved table near the front of the ballroom. Guests greeted her respectfully, yet Emily noticed something strange. The respect never reached their eyes. It looked more like obligation than affection. Curiosity settled quietly in her mind. During a brief break near the service station, Emily turned to another server who had worked these events for years. "Who is the woman sitting with Mr. Hayes?" she asked casually. The server glanced toward the table and immediately lowered her voice. "That is Eleanor Hayes." Emily waited. "His mother?" The server shook her head. "His grandmother. The real power in the family." Emily looked back toward the elegant older woman. Suddenly several things made sense. The nervous glances, the guarded conversations, the unusual attention from board members and investors. Eleanor Hayes did not merely belong to the family. She appeared to be the foundation holding it together. Minutes later, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone to the formal dinner presentation. Guests settled into their seats. The lights dimmed slightly. Soft music faded into silence. Emily circulated through the ballroom one final time before stopping near the back wall. From there she could observe almost everyone. Alexander sat near the center table. To his right sat Eleanor. To his left sat a silver-haired executive whose smile never seemed entirely genuine. Throughout the presentation, Emily noticed a pattern. Whenever Alexander spoke with investors, the executive watched carefully. Whenever Eleanor spoke, the same executive became visibly uncomfortable. Small details, tiny reactions. Yet invisible people survived by noticing tiny reactions. As the evening progressed, a series of speeches began. Company achievements, future investments, charitable initiatives. The audience applauded at all the expected moments. Then Eleanor Hayes unexpectedly requested the microphone. The room became instantly quiet. Even the waitstaff paused. The elderly woman stood slowly and smiled at the crowd. Her voice was warm, but carried unmistakable authority. My husband used to say that character is revealed when nobody is watching. Several guests exchanged nervous looks. Emily noticed it immediately. Eleanor continued. We spend our lives building companies, fortunes, and reputations. Yet in the end, trust remains the only thing that truly matters. The silence deepened. Across the ballroom, one guest shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another looked down at his glass. Emily felt as though the speech carried a meaning beyond the words themselves. So did Alexander. His expression remained calm, but he listened more carefully than anyone else in the room. Then Eleanor said something that changed everything. Tomorrow, an important decision will shape the future of our family and our company. I hope every person involved remembers that integrity cannot be inherited. It must be earned. The applause that followed sounded weaker than expected. Polite, controlled, uneasy. Emily watched the reactions around the room. Some guests smiled. Others appeared concerned. One man quietly left the ballroom altogether. The same man she had overheard in the hallway earlier. Her pulse quickened. Before she could think further, she felt a presence beside her. Alexander had somehow crossed the room without attracting attention. He stood near the service station, looking toward the stage where his grandmother had resumed her seat. Now do you understand? He asked softly. Emily did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the departing guest disappearing through the ballroom doors. I understand enough to know someone is hiding something, she said. Alexander nodded slowly. That is exactly what worries me. Then, for the first time all evening, he revealed something that made Emily realize the situation was even more serious than she had imagined. The person trying to take control of my family's future, he said quietly, is almost certainly sitting in this room tonight. Emily stared at Alexander for several seconds. The sounds of the gala seemed distant now, reduced to little more than background noise beneath the weight of his words. Somewhere in the ballroom, silverware touched fine china. Guests exchanged polite conversation. The string quartet resumed another elegant melody. Yet none of it felt important anymore. If you already know someone is working against you, Emily said quietly, why not confront them? Alexander gave a humorless smile. Because suspicion is not proof. He glanced toward the tables near the stage. And because the wrong accusation could destroy everything my grandfather built. Emily followed his gaze. The room appeared unchanged. Wealthy families laughed. Investors discussed future opportunities. Executives praised one another's success. But now she understood what she was really seeing. Not a celebration. A battlefield hidden beneath expensive manners. You still have not explained why you chose me, she said. Alexander looked at her directly. Because you are not part of this world. Emily almost laughed. I am standing in the middle of it. No, he replied. You work here. That is different. Before she could answer, a waiter approached with a message. Alexander read the note, frowned slightly, and folded it into his pocket. Excuse me for a few minutes. Then he disappeared into the crowd once again. Emily watched him leave. Something about the conversation continued bothering her. Not the anonymous warning. Not the family conflict. The request itself. Out of all the people available to him, why would a billionaire place his trust in a waitress he had only met tonight? The answer came unexpectedly less than 15 minutes later. Emily was delivering coffee to a private table near the ballroom's edge when she overheard two women speaking. Both belonged to families whose names regularly appeared in business magazines. "He refuses to play along," one woman whispered. "That is his problem." The second woman nodded. "Eleanor still supports him, but if tomorrow goes badly, that support may not matter." Emily placed the coffee cups carefully. Neither woman acknowledged her presence. They continued talking as though she were invisible. "Have they found someone suitable yet?" the first woman asked. "For what?" "The public image issue." The second woman lowered her voice further. "Investors are nervous. A stable family image would help. The board knows that." Emily walked away before hearing more, but a realization began forming. The request had never been random. Alexander was not asking her to impress anyone. He was asking her to expose something. As she reached the service station, she noticed Eleanor Hayes standing alone near one of the ballroom windows. Most guests seemed reluctant to approach her without invitation. The elderly woman appeared thoughtful, watching the city lights beyond the glass. To Emily's surprise, Eleanor gestured for her to come closer. Emily hesitated before approaching. "Good evening, ma'am." Eleanor smiled warmly. "You are Emily." It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am. My grandson rarely trusts people quickly." Emily remained silent. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with quiet intelligence. "That is why I find this situation interesting." Emily looked toward the ballroom. "I'm not sure I understand." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Neither does he, if we are being honest." The answer caught Emily off guard. "Mr. Hayes seems very certain of himself." "Alexander is certain about business," Eleanor said. "People are much harder." For a moment she studied Emily carefully. Not critically, thoughtfully. Then she asked a question no one else had asked all evening. "What do you see when you look at this room?" Emily considered the question. Most people would expect a safe answer. A polite answer. Instead, she told the truth. "I see a lot of people pretending." Eleanor's smile widened immediately. Exactly. Across the ballroom, several executives suddenly gathered around Alexander. Their expressions appeared serious. One of them was the silver-haired executive Emily had noticed throughout the evening. Another was the man from the hallway conversation. The moment Emily saw them standing together, a feeling settled in her chest. The pieces were moving into place. And whatever happened tomorrow morning, tonight was only the beginning. The dinner presentation ended, but the atmosphere inside the ballroom only grew heavier. Guests stood from their tables and resumed private conversations beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. From a distance, everything still looked elegant. Up close, Emily could feel the tension moving through the room like an invisible current. She remained near the service station, pretending to organize trays while quietly observing the people gathered around Alexander. The same small group of executives continued following him throughout the evening. Whenever he stopped to speak with investors, they appeared nearby. Whenever he moved across the ballroom, they somehow seemed to drift in the same direction. It was subtle, careful, almost impossible to notice unless someone was specifically looking for it. Emily was. A few minutes later, Eleanor Hayes approached her again. The older woman carried herself with calm confidence that seemed untouched by the anxiety affecting everyone else. "You are watching people," Eleanor said softly. Emily smiled. "Part of the job." Eleanor shook her head. "No. Most people look. Very few actually watch." The distinction surprised Emily. Before she could respond, Eleanor gestured toward the ballroom. "Tell me what you see." Emily hesitated only briefly. Several people seemed more interested in Alexander than in the event itself. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Good. And some of them appear nervous whenever you speak." This time, Eleanor laughed quietly. That observation took some board members years to figure out. Emily found herself smiling despite the tension. There was something refreshing about the older woman. Unlike many wealthy people she served, Eleanor never seemed interested in proving her importance. She simply possessed it. Their conversation ended when a younger executive hurried toward Eleanor carrying a folder. The expression on his face was urgent, not panicked, just concerned. Eleanor accepted the folder, glanced at its contents, and for the first time that evening, her smile disappeared. It lasted only a second. Then the composed expression returned. But Emily noticed. Invisible people always noticed. Across the room, Alexander was speaking with several investors when Eleanor signaled him over. The conversation between grandmother and grandson lasted less than a minute. Yet whatever she showed him immediately changed his mood. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he looked around the ballroom as if searching for someone. A moment later, his gaze found Emily. Not because she was important. Not because she belonged there. Because she was one of the few people he no longer suspected of having an agenda. The realization startled her. Minutes later he approached. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Emily glanced toward her manager. The ballroom was beginning to wind down. Most formal service had ended. "For a few minutes," she said. Alexander led her toward a quieter corridor outside the main ballroom. The sounds of the gala faded behind them. For the first time all evening, there was no audience. No executives. No investors. No family members. Just two people standing beneath soft hallway lighting. Alexander held the folder Eleanor had given him. "You asked why I chose you." Emily nodded. "I remember." He opened the folder and removed several pages. Financial reports. Meeting schedules. Internal communications. None of it meant much to her at first glance. Then she noticed something unusual. Certain names appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. The same names she had overheard earlier. The same people she had been watching all night. "These individuals are all connected," she said. Alexander looked genuinely surprised. "You noticed that?" Emily handed the papers back. "You would be amazed what people reveal when they assume nobody is listening." For the first time all evening, Alexander laughed. A real laugh. Brief but genuine. Then his expression became serious again. "That is exactly why I need your help." Emily looked at him carefully. This was no longer about pretending. No longer about appearances. Something much larger was unfolding. And deep down, she was beginning to realize that walking away might no longer be as simple as it had been a few hours earlier. Emily remained silent for several moments after Alexander finished speaking. The quiet corridor felt far removed from the glittering ballroom just beyond the doors. Here there were no speeches, no investors, no carefully rehearsed smiles. Only the truth, or at least as much of it as Alexander was willing to share. She studied him carefully. Throughout the evening she had seen a billionaire, a businessman, and a public figure. For the first time, she saw something else. A man carrying responsibilities he could not easily trust anyone else to help him carry. "You still have not told me exactly what you want from me," she said. Alexander nodded. "Fair." He leaned lightly against the wall and exhaled. "Tomorrow morning, the board will meet to vote on several changes involving company leadership and family control." Emily listened without interrupting. "Some people believe I am standing in the way of opportunities they want for themselves," he continued. "Others believe I am too cautious. Some simply want influence. And some are hiding something," Emily added. A faint smile appeared. "Exactly." For a moment neither spoke. Then Alexander surprised her. "Do you know why my grandmother likes you?" Emily blinked. "Your grandmother barely knows me." That has never stopped her from understanding people. Emily looked down the corridor toward the ballroom entrance. "And what exactly does she understand?" Alexander's answer came immediately. "You are not impressed by wealth." The statement caught her off guard because it was true. "I work 12-hour shifts serving wealthy people," she said. After a while, expensive watches stopped looking impressive. Alexander laughed quietly. "That may be the most honest thing anyone has said to me all year." Before Emily could reply, the ballroom doors opened and several guests entered the corridor. Their conversation stopped instantly when they noticed Alexander. Smiles appeared. Greetings followed. Compliments were exchanged. Everything sounded polished. Professional. Perfect. Yet Emily noticed something else. The moment the group continued walking, the smiles disappeared. Alexander noticed her noticing. "Now you understand." She nodded slowly. "Everyone is performing. Most of them have been performing for years." The words lingered between them. Then a hotel employee appeared and informed Emily that the evening was nearing its conclusion. Final service preparations were beginning. She thanked him and turned back toward Alexander. "I should get back." "Of course." Yet neither moved. Finally, Emily asked the question that had been sitting quietly in her mind all evening. "What happens if you are wrong?" Alexander looked surprised. "About what?" "About the people you suspect." For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "Then I lose people who trust me." Emily nodded. "And if you are right?" His gaze shifted toward the ballroom. "Then I discover how few people actually do." They returned together toward the main event space. As they entered, the contrast was immediate. Music, laughter, crystal chandeliers. Everything appeared flawless once again. Yet Emily could now see the cracks beneath the surface. Near the center of the room, Eleanor Hayes was speaking with several board members. Across the ballroom, the silver-haired executive stood beside the man from the hallway conversation. They stopped talking the instant they noticed Alexander approaching. Small detail. Important detail. Invisible people collected details the way investors collected assets. Emily quietly resumed her duties. She carried empty glasses toward the service station while observing the room from the edges. 10 minutes later, she noticed something unusual. Eleanor Hayes was no longer speaking to the board members. Instead, she was looking directly at Emily. The older woman's expression remained calm, confident, certain. Then she gave the slightest nod. A gesture, so subtle most people would never have seen it. But Emily did. And somehow, without a single word being spoken, she understood. The decision was no longer whether she would become involved. The decision had already been made. The only question now was how far this unexpected journey would take her before the truth finally revealed itself. The final hour of the gala unfolded beneath a glow of elegance that now felt almost theatrical to Emily. Guests continued smiling. Investors continued networking. Executives continued discussing opportunities and forecasts. Yet the longer she watched, the more she realized that nearly everyone in the room was hiding something. Some hid ambition, some hid fear, some hid disappointment, and a few, she suspected, were hiding the truth. Eleanor's subtle nod remained in her thoughts as she moved through the ballroom. It was not an order. It was not a request. It felt more like recognition, as if the older woman had already reached a conclusion that nobody else had. Near midnight, many guests began preparing to leave. Luxury coats appeared. Valets received instructions. Final conversations filled the ballroom with a softer energy than before. Emily was collecting empty glasses near a private lounge entrance when she noticed the silver-haired executive again. He was speaking quietly with 3 individuals she had seen throughout the evening. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet all 4 people looked around before separating in different directions. Emily remained focused on her work while observing through reflections in nearby windows. Years of serving wealthy clients had taught her a valuable lesson. People revealed more when they believed nobody was paying attention. 5 minutes later, she saw something else. The same silver-haired executive approached Eleanor Hayes. His smile appeared warm, respectful, professional. Eleanor listened patiently. Then she said something that caused the man's expression to tighten almost imperceptibly. The reaction lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. Emily did not. The executive recovered quickly and walked away. But the mask had slipped. Only briefly. Long enough. Emily carried a tray back toward the service station. As she passed Alexander, she slowed slightly. The silver-haired executive, she said quietly. He is careful. Alexander glanced across the room. Richard Calloway. Emily nodded. He hides frustration well. Alexander looked surprised. What makes you say that? Emily placed a glass onto the tray. Most people smile with their mouths. He smiles with calculations. For a moment, Alexander simply stared at her. Then he laughed softly. That may be the most accurate description of Richard I have ever heard. Yet beneath the humor, concern appeared in his eyes. The observation mattered. More than either of them wanted to admit. Minutes later, Eleanor gathered several board members near the front of the ballroom. It was not an official meeting. More like a final conversation before tomorrow's vote. Guests nearby naturally became curious. Small groups drifted closer. The atmosphere shifted again. Everyone seemed to understand that something important was approaching. Emily watched from a distance. Richard Calloway joined the gathering. So did several executives she had seen throughout the evening. Alexander arrived moments later. The room remained polite, civilized, elegant. Yet tension lingered beneath every word. Then Eleanor did something unexpected. She invited questions from several investors present at the gala. The conversation quickly turned toward leadership, trust, and the future direction of the company. One investor asked whether family unity remained strong. Another asked about succession planning. The answers remained diplomatic, carefully measured, until one investor directed a question toward Alexander himself. Who do you trust most right now? Silence followed. The question seemed innocent. It was not. Several faces immediately turned toward him, waiting, measuring, calculating. Alexander looked around the room. His eyes moved across executives, board members, advisors, and family associates. Then, Unexpectedly, his gaze stopped on Emily. The entire room followed his line of sight. For the first time that evening, dozens of wealthy guests looked directly at the waitress they had ignored for hours. Emily felt the attention immediately, yet she remained calm. Alexander answered slowly. The people I trust most are usually the people with the least reason to lie. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some guests smiled politely. Others appeared uncomfortable. Richard Calloway's expression remained perfectly composed. Too composed. Eleanor noticed it. So did Emily. And in that moment, a realization settled quietly into her mind. The truth was closer than anyone realized. The people hiding it were beginning to feel pressure. And tomorrow's vote would not simply reveal who held power. It would reveal who had been pretending all along. The gala finally came to an end shortly after midnight. One by one, the guests departed beneath the glow of the hotel entrance lights. Luxury sedans disappeared into the Manhattan night. Conversations faded. The ballroom slowly emptied. Yet for Alexander Hayes, the most important part of the evening had only just begun. The following morning, the board gathered inside the Hayes Corporate Center overlooking the East River. Executives filled the conference room. Advisors reviewed documents. Board members prepared for a vote that could reshape the future of the company. Emily had not expected to be there. She certainly had not planned to spend her day inside one of the most powerful boardrooms in America. Yet shortly after sunrise, a message had arrived from Eleanor Hayes asking her to attend as an observer. Nothing more, nothing less. As the meeting began, Emily sat quietly near the back of the room. Nobody paid much attention to her. Several executives appeared confused by her presence. Others seemed amused. To them, she was still just a waitress. That assumption would prove costly. The discussion started formally. Financial reports were presented. Growth projections were reviewed. Strategic recommendations filled the room. Everything appeared orderly, professional, controlled. Then the conversation shifted toward leadership and governance. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Questions became sharper. Opinions became stronger. Certain individuals began pushing aggressively for specific changes. Emily recognized many of the names from the documents Alexander had shown her. She also recognized several faces from the gala. As the debate intensified, Richard Calloway emerged as the strongest advocate for restructuring authority within the company. His arguments sounded reasonable, thoughtful, well-prepared, yet something felt wrong. Emily could not explain it at first. Then she noticed a familiar pattern. Every time another executive spoke, Richard subtly guided the discussion back toward the same objective, the same outcome, the same concentration of influence. It was not obvious. It was careful. But once seen, it could not be unseen. Across the room, Eleanor Hayes remained silent, watching, waiting. Finally, she asked a simple question. Who benefits most from these changes? The room became quiet. Richard smiled politely and began explaining how everyone would benefit. Employees, shareholders, investors, leadership. Yet as he spoke, Emily noticed several executives exchange nervous glances. The same glances she had seen throughout the gala. The same expressions hidden behind practiced smiles. Suddenly she understood. It was never about the proposal itself. It was about who controlled the information surrounding it. Eleanor seemed to reach the same conclusion. She calmly requested several supporting documents be reviewed publicly before any vote proceeded. The request changed everything. Questions emerged. Clarifications were demanded. Assumptions began unraveling. Information that had previously been accepted without scrutiny suddenly faced examination. Within an hour, momentum shifted dramatically, not because of accusations, not because of confrontation, because transparency had entered the room. By the afternoon, the board postponed the proposed changes pending further review. The vote was delayed. The pressure eased. And for the first time in weeks, Alexander looked as though he could breathe again. Later that evening, after the meeting ended, he found Emily standing outside the building overlooking the river. The city skyline reflected across the water as the sun disappeared behind the towers. Alexander handed her an envelope. She did not open it. "What is it?" she asked. "A thank you." Emily smiled gently and returned it to him. "I did not do this for money." Alexander looked at the envelope, then back at her. Slowly he nodded. For once, there was no surprise in his expression, only understanding. "I know." Several seconds passed in comfortable silence. Then Alexander extended his hand. Not as a billionaire. Not as a CEO. Simply as a man showing respect. Emily shook it. The moment felt surprisingly meaningful. No cameras. No audience. No headlines. Just quiet recognition. As they stood overlooking the city, Eleanor's words from the gala seemed truer than ever. Character is revealed when nobody is watching. And in the end, the most powerful person in the story had never been the billionaire in the boardroom. It had been the waitress nobody thought was important enough to notice.